Commander Vextall stood in front of the large viewing screen in his office, watching the endless stream of data flowing across the display. His three eyes blinked in sequence as he read through the latest reports from the mining operations on Kepler to 442. The numbers were not good. In fact, they were terrible. The Zephyrian Confederacy had spent millions of credits building the most advanced mining facility in the galaxy. The automated systems could extract precious minerals from the Yali, moons of Kepler 442, faster than any other technology known to exist. There was just one problem. Someone had to watch the machines work. It sounded simple enough. Sit in a chair, watch screens, press a button when something needed attention. The machines did almost everything by themselves. A worker might need to respond to an alert only once or twice during an 18-hour shift. The rest of the time, they just had to wait and watch. But no species in the Confederacy could handle the job. They had tried everyone. Dr. Kelmoth entered the office carrying a thick folder of reports. His blue skin looked even more blue than usual, which meant he was stressed. "Commander, I have the latest results from our recruitment efforts." Vextall turned away from the screen. "Please tell me you have good news." "I'm afraid not, sir." Dr. Kelmoth opened the folder and pulled out several sheets. The Blitzoids lasted an average of 12 minutes before abandoning their posts. They said the lack of activity made their nervous systems shut down. Vextall groaned. He had expected this result, but it still disappointed him. The Blitzoids were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible speed and energy. They could perform complex tasks in seconds that took other species hours to complete. But asking them to sit still was like asking a star to stop burning. "What about the Nexarians?" Vextall asked. The Nexarians were considered the smartest species in the Confederacy. Their brains could process information at rates that made quantum. Computers seemed slow. Dr. Kelmoth shook his head. They lasted 3 hours before requesting transfer to different duties. They said the work was beneath their intellectual capabilities. Several of them filed formal complaints claiming that watching automated systems was an insult to their advanced minds. This was even worse news. The Nexarians were supposed to be the perfect candidates. Their superior intelligence should have allowed them to understand the importance of the monitoring work. Instead, they saw it as a waste of their abilities. "The Serenians?" Vextall asked hopefully. The Serenians were famous for their calm nature and ability to meditate for days without moving. If anyone could handle long periods of inactivity, it should have been them. They did better, Dr. Kelmoth admitted. The longest any Serenian lasted was 11 hours. But even they eventually became restless. They said the artificial environment of the mining station disrupted their inner peace. They need natural surroundings to maintain their meditation for extended periods. Vextall felt his frustration growing. The mining operation on Kepler 442 was supposed to make the Confederacy rich beyond imagination. The moons contained enough rare minerals to power their civilization for thousands of years. But without workers who could handle the monitoring duties, the expensive equipment sat mostly unused. "What about the crystalline collective?" he asked. "The Quartarians tried to use their energy-based meditation techniques," Dr. Kelmoth explained. "But maintaining their crystalline forms in a meditative state for 18 hours drained their power reserves completely. 3 of them had to be hospitalized after their first shifts." The list of failures continued. The gaseous Vaporians couldn't maintain their required shapes for long periods in the mining station's atmosphere. The insectoid hive minds became agitated when their complex communication networks had nothing productive to coordinate. Even the patient tortoise people of Slow World gave up after a few days, claiming the work was too boring, even for their naturally slow pace of life. "Commander." Vextall walked to his window and looked out at the busy spaceport below. Ships from Vextall. Dozens of different worlds came and went. carrying goods and passengers throughout the Confederacy. All of this trade and prosperity depended on having enough resources to keep their civilization running. The minerals on Kepler 442 could secure their future for generations, but only if they could find workers capable of doing the simplest job in the galaxy. "Sir," Dr. Kelmuth said quietly, "there is one possibility we haven't explored yet." Vextal turned back to face him. "What do you mean?" "The humans," Dr. Kelmuth said. "We recently established diplomatic contact with their world, Earth. They're not members of the Confederacy yet, but they are considered a developing species with potential." Vextal had heard of humans, but he didn't know much about them. They were a young species that had only recently developed space travel. Their technology was primitive compared to most Confederacy members, but they had shown surprising adaptability in their first contacts with alien civilizations. "What makes you think humans might be different?" Vextal asked. Dr. Kelmuth pulled out another report from his folder. "I've been studying their psychology and behavior patterns. Humans have some very unusual traits compared to other species we know. They seem to have a natural ability to endure boredom and inactivity in ways that other intelligent species cannot." "Explain." "Well, humans regularly engage in activities that other species would find torture. They sit motionless for hours, watching moving images on screens for entertainment. They call it watching television or movies. They also have a biological need to become unconscious for approximately 8 hours out of every 24-hour cycle. They call this sleep." Vextal found this information fascinating. Most advanced species had evolved beyond the need for regular unconsciousness. They could rest their minds while remaining alert and aware of their surroundings. The idea of voluntarily becoming unconscious for hours seemed both primitive and potentially useful. They also practiced something called meditation and relaxation. Dr. Kelmuth continued, "But unlike the Serenians, who meditate to achieve higher spiritual states, humans seem to meditate simply to reduce stress and pass time. They appear to be comfortable with extended periods of non-productive activity." "This is interesting," Vextal admitted. "But they're such a primitive species. Do they even have the basic intelligence needed to monitor our equipment?" "Their intelligence is adequate," Dr. Kelmuth said. "They may not be as advanced as the Nexarians, but they can learn to operate simple monitoring systems. More importantly, they seem to have mental flexibility that our more advanced species lack. When faced with boring or repetitive tasks, humans often find ways to make the experience tolerable or even enjoyable." Vextal considered this information carefully. The Confederacy had exhausted almost every other option. Traditional recruitment methods had failed completely. Maybe it was time to try something different. "There's something else," Dr. Kelmuth added. "Humans have a concept they call work. They seem to understand that not all necessary activities are exciting or intellectually stimulating. They accept that some jobs are simply things that need to be done, and they're willing to do them in exchange for compensation." This was a revolutionary concept for most Confederacy species. Advanced civilizations had largely eliminated unpleasant or boring work through automation and specialization. Citizens pursued activities that matched their natural abilities and interests. The idea of deliberately choosing to do something boring for payment was almost unthinkable. "How do we contact them?" Vextal asked. "We can post a recruitment notice through the Galactic Employment Board," Dr. Kelmuth suggested. "Earth has recently gained access to the network. We don't need to explain all the details about why other species have failed. We can simply describe the job requirements and see if any humans are interested." Vextal nodded slowly. It was worth trying. The mining operation couldn't continue to lose money while they searched for the perfect workers. If humans were willing to attempt the job, they deserved a chance to prove themselves. Meanwhile, On Earth, Jake Morrison sat in his small apartment in Cleveland, Ohio, staring at his computer screen. The notice had appeared on his job search page just a few minutes ago. The pay was incredible, far more than anything he could earn on Earth. The job description was vague, but seemed simple enough. Monitor automated systems. Respond to alerts. When necessary. Experience with advanced technology preferred, but not required. Jake had lost his construction job 6 months ago when his company bought new robotic equipment. His unemployment benefits were running out, and he was behind on rent. The job posting mentioned that successful candidates would receive housing, food, and transportation in addition to their salary. It sounded too good to be true, but Jake was desperate enough to try anything. He clicked the application button and began filling out the forms. He had no idea that he was about to become part of the solution to one of the galaxy's most challenging employment problems. Jake Morrison stepped off the shuttle at Luna Base and immediately felt like he was in a science fiction movie. The moon's surface stretched out beyond the transparent walls, gray and covered with craters under the black star-filled sky. He had never been off Earth before, and the sight took his breath away. A tall, thin alien with 3 eyes and blue-green skin approached him. The creature wore what looked like a military uniform, with symbols Jake couldn't read. "You are Jake Morrison. From Earth?" The alien asked in perfect English, though his voice sounded like it was coming through water. "That's me," Jake replied, trying not to stare at the alien's third eye, which sat in the middle of his forehead and seemed to move independently of the other two. "I am Administrator Zekmar. Follow me to the testing facility." The alien turned and walked toward a corridor lined with glowing panels. Jake grabbed his small bag and hurried to keep up. As they walked, Jake saw other beings that were clearly not human. Some looked like walking crystals that sparkled as they moved. Others appeared to be made of some kind of gas or mist contained in transparent suits. A few looked like giant insects walking on their back legs. Jake tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to be amazed by the variety of life forms around him. "Are all these people here for the same job?" Jake asked. "They are candidates." "Yes," Administrator Zekmar replied. 17 different species have sent representatives. You are the only human." They entered a large room that reminded Jake of a doctor's waiting room, except much bigger. Simple chairs were arranged in neat rows, and the walls were plain white with no decorations. The lighting was bright, but not harsh. It was the most boring room Jake had ever seen. The other candidates were already seated, and Jake could see that. Each species had grouped together. The crystal beings sat perfectly still, their bodies glowing with soft light. The gas creatures floated in their suits, maintaining perfect sphere shapes. The insect-like beings clicked and chirped to each other in what sounded like a complex language. Administrator Zekmar gestured to an empty chair near the back. "Please sit. The evaluation will begin shortly." Jake walked to his assigned seat, nodding politely to the other candidates as he passed. Most of them ignored him, but a few of the crystal beings turned their glowing forms toward him, briefly before returning to their meditation. Once Jake was seated, Administrator Zekmar moved to the front of the room. "Candidates, you will now begin the evaluation process. The instructions are simple. Sit in your chairs. Wait. Do nothing. The evaluation will conclude when it concludes. You may not leave your seats unless you choose to withdraw from consideration. Are there any questions?" A voice like breaking glass came from one of the crystal beings. "How long will this evaluation last?" "The evaluation will conclude when it concludes," Administrator Zekmar repeated. "Any other questions?" Jake raised his hand. "Is there a bathroom break scheduled?" Several of the alien candidates made sounds. That might have been laughter, though it was hard to tell. Administrator Zekmar's 3 eyes all focused on Jake. There are facilities available if needed. Simply raise your hand, and an assistant will escort you. However, leaving your seat may affect your evaluation. Got it, Jake said, settling back in his chair. Administrator Zikmar left the room, and Jake heard the soft sound of a door sealing shut. He looked around at the other candidates and wondered what exactly they were supposed to be waiting for. The crystal beings immediately began what appeared to be intense meditation. Their bodies pulsed with rhythmic light, and Jake could feel a strange energy coming from their direction. The gas creatures maintained their perfect spherical shapes, floating motionlessly in their suits. The insect beings had stopped their clicking and now sat completely still, their compound eyes staring straight ahead. Jake had no idea what he was supposed to do. The instructions seemed clear enough. Sit and wait. Do nothing. He had done plenty of that in his life, especially during the long months of unemployment. He leaned back in his chair and looked around the room again. After about 10 minutes, Jake started to feel sleepy. He had gotten up very early that morning to catch his flight to the spaceport, and the excitement of space travel was wearing off. The chair was reasonably comfortable, and the room was quiet except for the soft humming of air circulation systems. He closed his eyes and tried to relax. This was actually kind of nice. When was the last time someone had told him to just sit and do nothing? Usually, he was rushing around looking for work, filling out applications, or worrying about paying bills. This was like a vacation from all that stress. Within an hour, Jake was dozing lightly. He wasn't fully asleep, but he was in that comfortable state between waking and sleeping, where time seemed to pass without notice. His breathing became slow and regular. Behind a hidden panel in the wall, Commander Vextal and Dr. Kelmoth watched the candidates through concealed cameras. They had monitoring equipment that could track vital signs, brain activity, and stress levels for each species. Look at the readings from the human, Dr. Kelmoth said, pointing to a display screen. His stress levels are dropping rapidly. His heart rate is slowing to what appears to be a resting state. Commander Vextal studied the data. Is he becoming ill? Other species show increased stress during the evaluation. No, sir. If I'm reading this correctly, he's entering what humans call a sleep state. His brain activity shows the patterns we've seen in our research on human physiology. On the screens showing the other candidates, the situation was very different. The crystal beings were maintaining their meditation, but their energy readings showed they were working hard to stay focused. The gas creatures were struggling to keep their perfect shapes as time passed. The insect beings had started to make small clicking sounds again, showing signs of agitation. Back in the testing room, Jake shifted slightly in his chair and found an even more comfortable position. He was definitely sleeping now, though not deeply. His body had naturally adjusted to the environment, and he looked completely relaxed. The other candidates began to notice the human's behavior. Some of the crystal beings' glow flickered as they lost concentration, distracted by Jake's apparent lack of effort. A few of the gas creatures started to lose their spherical shape as they turned to look at him. 2 hours passed. Jake continued to sleep peacefully, while the other candidates grew increasingly uncomfortable. The room's temperature was perfectly controlled, and there were no distracting sounds or movements. For most species, this kind of environment was torture. Their minds craved stimulation, activity, or at least some kind of challenge to focus on. But Jake seemed to be treating the evaluation like a nap opportunity. His face was relaxed, and he occasionally smiled slightly as if he was having pleasant dreams. Every now and then he would shift position or stretch without fully waking up, then settle back into sleep. 3 hours in, one of the insect beings stood up and walked to the door. It made a series of rapid clicking sounds, and the door opened to reveal an assistant who escorted the candidate out of the room. The first withdrawal had occurred. The observers watched this development with interest. The hive mind representative couldn't handle the lack of coordinated activity, Dr. Kelmoth noted. Their species requires constant communication and task sharing to maintain psychological stability. By the 4th hour, 2 more candidates had left. One of the gas creatures had lost the ability to maintain its form and requested to withdraw. A crystal being whose glow had become erratic also chose to leave rather than continue struggling with the enforced inactivity. Jake slept through all of this. His body clock seemed to have adjusted to treating this as rest time. The monitoring equipment showed he was going through normal sleep cycles, including periods of deeper sleep and lighter rest. The remaining candidates were becoming increasingly aware that the human was not struggling at all. Some began to question their own approaches to the evaluation. If doing nothing was the goal, why was the human the only one who seemed to actually be doing nothing? A few of the crystal beings tried to copy Jake's approach. They dimmed their glow and attempted to enter a sleep-like state. But their species had evolved beyond the need for unconsciousness, and they found it impossible to truly relax their minds the way the human had. 5 hours passed. Jake woke up briefly, looked around the room, and noticed that there were fewer candidates than before. He wondered if he had missed something important, but since no one had told him to leave, he figured he was still in the running for the job. He closed his eyes again and drifted back to sleep. The observers were fascinated. "He's not fighting the inactivity," Commander Vextal observed. "Every other species sees this as a challenge to endure. The human treats it as an opportunity to rest." "It's exactly what we hoped for," Dr. Kelmoth agreed. "Look at his stress readings. They're lower now than when he first entered the room. The evaluation is actually beneficial to his well-being." By the 6th hour, half the candidates had withdrawn. The remaining beings were showing clear signs of distress. Their vital signs indicated high stress levels, and their behavior was becoming increasingly agitated. Some were fidgeting constantly, while others were putting enormous effort into maintaining their meditation or focus. Hour 7 began with a soft crackling sound. One of the crystal beings, who had been glowing steadily since the evaluation started, suddenly flickered like a dying light bulb. The creature's form wavered, its crystalline structure becoming less solid and more transparent. After a few minutes of struggle, it stood up and walked unsteadily toward the exit. Jake stirred slightly at the sound, but didn't wake up. He simply shifted in his chair, found a more comfortable position, and continued sleeping. His breathing remained deep and regular, and a small smile played at the corners of his mouth, as if he was having a pleasant dream. Dr. Kelmoth made notes on his observation pad. The Quartarians' energy reserves are depleted. Their meditation requires constant power to maintain their crystalline form. Without external energy sources, they cannot sustain the process indefinitely. Commander Vextal nodded as he watched the crystal being leave the room. "How many candidates remain?" 14, Dr. Kelmoth replied. "We started with 27 from 17 species. The human continues to show no signs of distress." In the testing room, the remaining candidates were beginning to show more obvious signs of struggle. The gas creatures were having increasing difficulty maintaining their perfect spherical shapes. One had developed a slight wobble, and another had started to stretch into an oval form, despite its obvious efforts to stay round. The insect beings were making soft clicking sounds again, though they were clearly trying to stay quiet. Their compound eyes moved constantly, scanning the room as if looking for something to do or someone to communicate with. One of them had started tapping its foot-like appendage against the floor in a nervous rhythm. The few remaining crystal beings were struggling with their meditation. Their glow had become irregular, pulsing instead of staying steady. They were working hard to maintain their focus, but the extended period of inactivity was draining their energy faster than they could replenish it. Jake had been asleep for over 6 hours now, and he looked more rested than when he had first arrived. His face was relaxed, and his posture was completely natural. Unlike the other candidates who were fighting against the boredom and inactivity, Jake seemed to be benefiting from it. Hour 8 brought the first major breakdown, one of the gas. Creature suddenly lost its spherical form completely, spreading out into a formless cloud within its containment suit. It made a sound like air escaping from a balloon and immediately moved toward the exit. The loss of form control was apparently too embarrassing or uncomfortable to continue. This departure seemed to affect the other candidates. Several of them watched the gas creature leave, and Jake could see doubt in their movements even though his eyes were closed. The evaluation was clearly harder than any of them had expected. One of the insect beings stood up and began pacing back and forth in a small area near its chair. Its clicking became louder and more rapid, and it was obviously having trouble controlling its need for activity. After about 10 minutes of pacing, it gave up and left the room. Jake woke up briefly during this commotion. He opened his eyes, looked around at the remaining candidates, and noticed that there were significantly fewer beings in the room than when he had first arrived. He wondered if he should be doing something more active to show his qualification for the job, but the instructions had been clear. Sit and wait. Do nothing. Jake figured that if they wanted him to do something else, they would tell him. He closed his eyes again and drifted back to sleep. Remarkable, Commander Vexdal said as he watched Jake settle back into sleep. He woke up, assessed the situation, and chose to continue resting. He's not second-guessing the instructions or trying to impress the evaluators. His approach is completely different from every other species we've tested, Dr. Kelnoth agreed. Look at the stress readings for the remaining candidates compared to the humans. The monitoring screens showed dramatic differences between Jake and the other candidates. While the aliens showed elevated heart rates, increased brain activity, and chemical markers of stress and anxiety, Jake's readings were actually better than they had been when he first sat down. His body was treating this as quality rest time. Hour 9 saw another crystal being give up. Its glow had become so dim that it was barely visible, and its form was starting to lose cohesion. It stood up slowly, its crystalline structure making soft chiming sounds as it moved, and walked toward the exit with what appeared to be great effort. The remaining candidates began to look around at each other more frequently. They were realizing that this evaluation was turning into an endurance contest, and many of them were reaching their limits. The extended inactivity was affecting different species in different ways, but none of them were handling it as well as the sleeping human. One of the gas creatures started to make soft humming sounds, apparently trying to entertain itself. Maintain focus. The sound was barely audible, but in the quiet room it seemed loud. The creature was clearly struggling to maintain its discipline. Jake had entered a deeper phase of sleep and was completely unaware of the growing tension around him. His body had fully adapted to the environment, and he was getting genuinely restorative rest. His subconscious mind had accepted the situation as a perfect opportunity for sleep, something his body had been needing after months of stress from unemployment and financial worries. Hour 10 brought a cascade of departures. 2 more insect beings left within minutes of each other, unable to cope with the lack of stimulation and social interaction their species required. A gas creature that had been struggling to maintain its form finally gave up and requested to leave. The observers noted each departure with interest. The hive minds cannot function without constant communication and coordination, Dr. Kelmoth explained. The Vaporians require active concentration to maintain their physical integrity. Extended periods of forced inactivity are contrary to their basic nature. And the human? Commander Vexdal asked. The human appears to be treating this as beneficial. Rest time. His body is actually recovering from previous stress and fatigue. For him, this isn't an ordeal to endure, but an opportunity to recharge. Hour 11 saw the departure of another crystal being. Its energy reserves were completely exhausted, and it couldn't maintain its meditation any longer. As it left, it cast what might have been a curious look at the still sleeping human, as if trying to understand how he was managing to remain so peaceful. Now, only 8 candidates remained from the original 27. The room felt much emptier, and the remaining beings seemed more aware of each other's presence. They were the survivors, but most of them were clearly struggling. The insect beings were making more noise now, unable to completely suppress their need for communication. Their clicking had become a constant soft background sound. One of them was moving its limbs in small, repetitive patterns, apparently trying to satisfy its need for activity without leaving its chair. The gas creatures were having visible difficulty maintaining their shapes. They had given up on perfect spheres and were now just trying to stay roughly round. Their forms wavered and shifted constantly as they fought against their natural tendency to disperse. The remaining crystal beings were barely glowing now. Their meditation had become a desperate struggle to maintain consciousness and form. They were using their last energy reserves to stay in the evaluation. Hour 12 arrived with Jake still sleeping soundly. He had been unconscious for most of the evaluation, and his body showed no signs of stress or fatigue. In fact, he looked better than he had when he arrived. His face was relaxed, his breathing was deep and steady, and he appeared to be in the most comfortable sleep of his life. The contrast between Jake and the other candidates was becoming more dramatic with each passing hour. While they fought against the inactivity and boredom, he embraced it. While they saw the evaluation as a test to endure, he treated it as an opportunity to rest. Another gas creature lost its battle with form control and left the room, followed shortly by an insect being that had been clicking frantically for the past hour. The departures were happening more frequently as the remaining candidates reached their breaking points. Jake stirred slightly and changed position, stretching his arms and settling into an even more comfortable pose. He was still asleep, still completely unaware of the struggle happening around him. His natural human ability to sleep for extended periods was proving to be exactly what the evaluators were looking for. Hour 13 began with only 5 candidates remaining. The room was now mostly empty, and the few survivors were showing severe signs of stress. They had lasted longer than most of their species mates, but they were clearly approaching their limits. Commander Vextal and Dr. Kelmoff watched with growing excitement. The human was not only surviving the evaluation, but thriving in it. His approach was so fundamentally different from every other species that it was revolutionizing their understanding of what they were looking for. Sir, Dr. Kelnoth said quietly, I believe we may have found our ideal candidate. Hour 14 began with a soft chiming sound as another crystal being finally gave up. Its glow had faded to almost nothing, and its crystalline form was becoming transparent around the edges. The creature stood up with obvious difficulty, its structure making musical sounds as it moved toward the exit. It paused briefly to look at Jake, who continued sleeping peacefully in his chair. Dr. Kelmoth was studying the brain, scanned readings from Jake's monitoring equipment. Commander, you need to see this, he said, pointing at the display screen. A human's brain activity is showing complete sleep cycles. He's going through REM phases, deep sleep periods, and light sleep stages, just like he would in his natural sleeping environment. Commander Vextal moved closer to examine the data. Explain what this means. Most species we've tested are fighting to stay alert and focused during the inactivity. Their brains are working overtime trying to find something to think about or concentrate on. But the human's brain has essentially switched into rest mode. He's not suffering through this experience at all. His body is treating it as beneficial recovery time. On the monitoring screens, They could see the stark contrast between Jake and the remaining candidates. The few surviving aliens showed elevated stress hormones, increased heart rates, and brain patterns indicating anxiety and discomfort. Jake's readings looked like someone enjoying a perfect night's sleep in the testing room. Only 4 candidates now remained besides Jake, one insect being sat rigidly in its chair, making soft clicking sounds that had become almost constant. Its compound eyes moved frantically as it searched for anything to focus on. 2 gas creatures struggled to maintain even basic cohesion within their containment suits, their forms wobbling and shifting despite their obvious efforts. One final crystal being glowed so dimly it was barely visible, its meditation hanging by a thread. Jake had been asleep for over 13 hours now, and he looked more rested than anyone had a right to look after sitting in a chair for so long. His breathing was deep and regular, and his face showed the peaceful expression of someone having pleasant dreams. Occasionally, he would smile slightly or murmur something too quiet to hear. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Kelmuth said as he reviewed the data from all their previous testing. Every other species views extended inactivity as something to overcome or endure. The human sees it as an opportunity. His stress levels are actually lower now than when he first entered the room. Commander Vextall was beginning to understand why humans might be perfect for the mining operation. On Kepler 442, workers need to monitor automated systems that run independently for most of their shifts. The ideal employee would be someone who can remain alert for the few moments when intervention is needed, but who doesn't become frustrated or stressed during the long periods of inactivity. Exactly, Dr. Kelmuth agreed. Look at these readings. The human's brain shows he's getting genuine rest during the inactive periods, but his monitoring equipment indicates he would wake up quickly if there was a sudden noise or change in environment. He's not unconscious in a way that would make him unresponsive. He's just resting efficiently. Hour 15 brought the collapse of one of the gas creatures. It had been fighting to maintain its form for hours, but finally lost cohesion completely. The shapeless cloud within its containment suit made a sound like a deflating balloon, and the creature requested immediate extraction from the evaluation. The insect being looked around the nearly empty room and began clicking more rapidly. Its species was social by nature, requiring constant interaction and communication with others. The isolation and silence were becoming unbearable. After a few more minutes of visible distress, it stood up and walked quickly toward the exit. Now, only Jake and 2 other candidates remained. One crystal being continued its failing meditation, barely glowing anymore. One gas creature maintained a rough spherical shape through sheer willpower, though its form constantly wavered and shifted, stirred slightly and shifted position, turning his head to the other side and settling back into sleep. The movement was completely natural, like someone adjusting their position in bed. He showed no signs of discomfort or awareness of how long he had been sitting there. "Remarkable," Commander Vextall said. "He's been in that chair for 15 hours, and he looks more comfortable than our office workers after a normal day." Dr. Kelmuth was reviewing psychological profiles of different species. "I think I understand what's happening. Most advanced species have evolved beyond the need for extended unconsciousness. We see sleep as primitive or inefficient. But for humans, sleep is still a necessary biological function. They've developed the ability to sleep anywhere, anytime, when their environment is safe and non-threatening. So the human's brain recognized this situation as safe and appropriate for rest? Precisely. The instructions told him to sit and do nothing. His subconscious mind interpreted that as permission to sleep. For him, this isn't a test of endurance. It's a nap opportunity. Hour 16 arrived with another departure. The gas creature finally lost its battle with form control. It had been struggling for hours to maintain even a basic shape, and the effort had exhausted its energy reserves. As it left the room, it made a sound that might have been admiration or confusion. As it looked at the peacefully sleeping human Dot, now only Jake and one crystal being remained. The crystal creature's glow was so faint it was almost invisible. Its meditation was clearly failing, but it was using the last of its strength to continue. The being seemed determined to outlast the strange human who had been sleeping through. The entire evaluation. Jake was entering another REM sleep phase, his eyes moving slightly beneath his closed lids. His brain activity showed he was dreaming, and his vital signs indicated he was getting genuinely restorative sleep. After months of stress from unemployment and financial problems, his body was taking full advantage of this opportunity to recover. "Commander," Dr. Kelmoth said quietly, "I believe we should wake the human and begin his orientation for the job." "What about the remaining candidate?" Commander Vextal asked, gesturing toward the crystal being. "Look at its energy readings. It will collapse within the next hour. It's using its last reserves to maintain consciousness. The evaluation is causing significant harm to its physiology." Commander Vextal considered this. The crystal being was clearly suffering, pushing itself beyond reasonable limits in an attempt to prove its worthiness. But the human was genuinely thriving in the same environment that was breaking the other candidate. At that moment, the crystal being's glow flickered one final time and went out completely. The creature's form became transparent, then began to fade. With obvious reluctance, it stood up and moved toward the exit. As it passed Jake's chair, it stopped for a moment, as if trying to understand how the human had succeeded where it had failed. Jake was now alone in the testing room. He had outlasted 26 other candidates from 16 different species, and he had done it by sleeping. His approach had been so fundamentally different from everyone else's that it had revolutionized the evaluators' understanding of what they were looking for. Commander Vextal and Dr. Kelmoth entered the observation booth to make their final decision. The data was clear. Jake had not only survived the evaluation, but had thrived during it. His stress levels were lower than when he started, his body was well rested, and his brain patterns showed he would be alert and responsive when needed. "How long should we let him sleep?" Commander Vextal asked. "His natural sleep cycle should wake him within the next hour or two," Dr. Kelmoth replied. "Humans typically sleep for 7 to 9 hours at a time. He's been asleep for about 14 hours, but given his previous stress levels, his body may need extra recovery time." They decided to wait for Jake to wake up naturally. They wanted to see how he would react to finding himself alone in the room, and whether he would remain calm and patient even after realizing the evaluation had apparently ended. Jake slept peacefully for another hour and a half. When he finally began to stir, his awakening was gradual and natural. He stretched, yawned, and slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, he looked confused about where he was. Then memory returned, and he sat up straighter in his chair. He looked around the empty room with surprise. All the other candidates were gone. The chairs that had been filled with various alien beings were now empty. Jake wondered if he had missed something important, or if the evaluation had ended while he was asleep. He stood up and stretched again, working out the stiffness from sitting in the chair for so long, despite having been in the same position. For hours, he felt remarkably good. The sleep had been exactly what his body needed after months of stress and worry. Jake walked to what he remembered as the observation window and knocked gently. "Hello?" he called out. "Are we still waiting? Did I miss something?" His voice was calm and friendly, with no sign of anxiety or frustration. He seemed genuinely curious about the situation, rather than worried about his performance in the evaluation. The door opened, and Commander Vextal entered the room. His 3 eyes focused on Jake with what might have been surprise or admiration. "Jake Morrison of Earth, Commander Vextal said formally. "You have successfully completed the evaluation." 3 weeks later, Jake found himself on mining station Theta 7, orbiting one of the moons of Kepler 442. The station was much larger than he had expected. With long corridors lined with viewing windows, it showed the beautiful ringed planet. Below, the automated mining equipment worked constantly on the moon's surface, extracting precious minerals and loading them onto transport ships. Jake's supervisor was a friendly Zephyrian named Techalon, who had been working in the mining operations for over 20 years. Techalon had 3 eyes like all his species, but he wore them with a cheerful expression that made Jake feel welcome despite being the only human on the station. "Your job is very simple," Techalon explained as they walked through the monitoring center. "These screens show the status of all mining equipment on the surface. Most of the time, everything runs automatically. The machines know what to do, and they do it well." They stopped in front of a wall covered with dozens of monitors. Each screen showed different data about the mining operation. Jake could see graphs showing production rates, equipment temperatures, mineral quality readings, and dozens of other measurements he didn't understand yet. "When do I need to do something?" Jake asked. Techalon pointed to a large red button next to the main console. "If any alarm sounds, you press this button to acknowledge it. Then you call me or one of the other supervisors. Most alarms are just routine notifications that don't require any action. Maybe once or twice per shift, you might need to restart a machine or approve a change in mining pattern." Jake nodded. It seemed straightforward enough. "What do I do the rest of the time?" "Whatever you want," Techalon said with what Jake was learning to recognize as a Zephyrian smile. "Read, sleep, think, look out the windows. The important thing is that you stay in this room and remain alert enough to respond to alarms. Many species find this very difficult, but humans seem to be naturally good at it." Jake settled into his assigned chair, which was much more comfortable than the one in the testing room. It could recline, had good back support, and even had a small table where he could put food or drinks. The viewing window next to his station showed a spectacular view of the planet's rings and the busy mining operations on the moon's surface. His first shift began at what the station called morning, though the concept of day and night was artificial. In space, Jake watched the screens for the first hour, familiarizing himself with the normal patterns and readings. Everything seemed to be working smoothly. After the second hour, Jake started to feel sleepy. The gentle humming of the station systems was relaxing, and the comfortable chair made it easy to doze. He had learned during his orientation that short naps were not only allowed but encouraged, as long as he could wake up quickly when needed. Jake closed his eyes and drifted into a light sleep. His brain remained partially alert, monitoring the sounds of the station and ready to wake him if anything changed. It was the same kind of rest he had discovered during the evaluation, but now it was actually part of his job. An hour later, a soft chime woke him up. One of the screens was flashing yellow, indicating a routine status update from Mining Unit 7. Jake pressed the acknowledgement button, checked that all readings were normal, and made a note in the logbook. The entire process took less than 2 minutes. With the alert handled, Jake looked out the window at the amazing view. Earth was visible as a small blue dot in the distance, barely noticeable among the stars. He was further from home than any human had ever been, doing a job that no other species could handle, and getting paid more money than he had ever imagined possible. The rest of his first shift passed peacefully. He napped for a few hours, watched the mining equipment work on the surface, and responded to 3 more routine alerts. When his replacement arrived for the next shift, Jake felt more rested than he had in months. Over the following weeks, Jake settled into a routine that felt natural and comfortable. His shifts were 18 hours long, but most of that time was spent resting, reading, or simply enjoying the view. The work was so easy that Jake sometimes felt guilty about his salary, but Tekalon assured him that his presence was essential to the operation. Before humans joined our mining program, we had constant problems, Tekalon explained during one of their conversations. Other species would abandon their posts when they became bored, or they would make unnecessary changes to the equipment because they felt they needed to do something productive. Some would become so frustrated with the inactivity that they would request transfers after just a few days. Jake found this hard to understand. The job was perfect for him. He got plenty of rest, had time to think about his life and future plans. And the occasional alerts provided just enough activity to keep things interesting. The pay was excellent. His room on the station was comfortable, and the food was surprisingly good. 1 month into his assignment, Jake received a message from Dr. Kelnoth requesting a meeting to discuss his performance. Jake worried that he might be doing something wrong, but when they met in Dr. Kelnoth's office, the alien scientist seemed very pleased. "Jake, your success has exceeded all our expectations," Dr. Kelnoth said. "Your response times to alerts are excellent. You've had 0 incidents or errors, and your psychological evaluations show that you're actually enjoying the work. This is unprecedented." "It's a great job," Jake replied honestly. "I can't believe other species have trouble with it." Dr. Kelnoth showed Jake a datapad with charts and graphs. "Your stress levels have continued to decrease since you started working. Most workers in isolated environments show increasing stress over time, but you're showing the opposite pattern. The work environment is actually beneficial to your mental health." "I feel better than I have in years," Jake admitted. "Back on Earth, I was always worried about money, looking for work, dealing with stress. Here, I have everything I need, interesting work, and time to just be myself." "This has led to some exciting developments," Dr. Kelnoth continued. "Based on your success, the Confederacy has decided to expand the human recruitment program. We're planning to hire dozens more humans for similar positions throughout our mining operations." Jake felt a surge of pride. His success was opening doors for other humans to find good jobs in space. "That's great news. I know a lot of people back home who would love opportunities like this." "We've also been studying your approach to the work," Dr. Kelnoth said. "The way humans handle extended periods of low activity is remarkable. You use the time for rest and recovery, which keeps you fresh and alert when action is needed. Other species either fight the inactivity, which exhausts them, or they become completely passive, which makes them slow to respond." 3 months after Jake started his job, he was promoted to senior monitor, responsible for overseeing 3 different mining stations. The promotion came with a significant pay increase and his own small spacecraft for traveling between stations. Jake had gone from unemployed construction worker to senior space operations manager in less than 4 months. He sent regular messages back to Earth, describing his new life to his friends and family. His friend Pete Collins was amazed by Jake's transformation. "You went from sleeping on my couch to being some kind of space executive," Pete wrote back. "How does that even happen?" Jake's response was simple and honest. "I found a job where they pay me to be good at something I was already good at. Taking naps and staying calm when nothing's happening. Who knew those were valuable job skills?" The success of the human recruitment program led to major changes in how the Zephyrian Confederacy approached staffing for long-duration, low-activity positions. They established a human resources division specifically to recruit Earth workers for jobs that other species found impossible. Within a year, over 200 humans were working in various roles throughout the Confederacy's operations. Staffed monitoring stations served as long-range scout ship observers and filled other positions that required patience and the ability to remain calm during extended periods of inactivity. Jake became something of a celebrity among humans working. in space. He was featured in articles about the new opportunities opening up for Earth workers, and he often gave advice to new recruits about adapting to life in the Confederacy. His advice was always simple. Don't try to be something you're not. The aliens hired us because we're good at being human. Use the quiet time to rest, think, or just enjoy the view. When something needs attention, handle it calmly and efficiently. Most importantly, remember that doing nothing productive is sometimes the most productive thing you can do. 2 years after his first day on mining station Theta 7, Jake stood in his new office as Regional Human Resources Coordinator for the Outer System Mining Operations. Through his window, he could see dozens of ships coming and going, many of them crewed by humans who had followed in his footsteps. He often thought back to that day in the testing room, when he had simply decided to take a nap while alien candidates struggled with the enforced inactivity. That decision had changed not only his life, but had opened up an entire new frontier for human workers throughout the galaxy. Jake's story became a legend among space workers, the man who got hired for doing nothing, and who proved that sometimes the most valuable skill is knowing when not to act.